The moment I saw his name on the docket, I knew the universe had a twisted sense of humor. Michael Aaron Connors, petitioner Emily Rose Connors. Docket, Jagerstowiwatan 935, FAM. Subject divorce, custody dispute, high asset marital dissolution. I stared at the top of the page for a moment longer than I should have. 3 slow seconds, maybe 4. Then I turned to the next file in the stack. Expression still, my robe straight posture, neutral hands steady. No one in the room noticed anything different, and that was exactly how I wanted it. But inside a door I'd boarded shut 15 years ago, creaked open just wide enough for something old and cold to crawl out. Courtroom 3C, family division, Monday morning. The air was too bright and too quiet. At 9:04 a.m. he walked in, 4 minutes late, naturally. Still thinking time bent for him? I didn't recognize him at first. That was the surprising part. I expected my gut to lurch the second he appeared. I expected some kind of involuntary physical reaction, but instead there was only stillness. He looked older, not in a tragic way, just more worn, a little softer around the jaw. Same walk, though. Same self-importance. He passed by me without a glance, took his place at the petitioner's table, placed down a neat stack of papers, smoothed his tie, waited. He didn't recognize me, not even a flicker. And in that moment, I realized he hadn't just left me. He'd erased me. 15 years ago, I made this man. Not metaphorically, literally. I worked 2 jobs barista, by dawn janitor by night, so he could focus on torts and case law. I paid our rent. I ironed his shirts. I made his flashcards. And I told myself it was love, an investment, a future we were building together. He used to say, "It's us against the world, Meg. You hold me up now, and I'll carry us both later." I didn't know later had an expiration date. The day he passed the bar, I made him dinner. I was so proud I cried into the sauce. He never showed. I came home the next morning from my overnight shift and found the apartment half empty. His half. On the counter, a single typed sheet, cold, final. I think we've outgrown each other. I need to focus on building my future. I'll send for the rest of my things. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. No signature, no apology. Back in courtroom 3C, the bailiff announced the case. Docket TOA 935 FAM, Connors versus Connors. I straightened in my chair, tucked my hand under the bench. No reaction, just another case. Michael stood. Michael Connors representing myself, Your Honor. The irony almost made me laugh. He could afford a lawyer, but Michael always thought he argued best alone. Thought charm could outtalk truth. He looked up to address the court, and for 1 second our eyes met. There, that flicker. A flicker of something behind his pupils. "Do I know you?" But I said nothing. I wasn't Meg anymore. I was the judge now. He hadn't just underestimated me. He had deleted me. And now he stood in my courtroom, asking for custody of children property rights asset division. Hoping the law would smile on him the way I once did, I read through the file line by line. Custody of 2 children, a lake house in Michigan, a joint business account, an allegation of infidelity. Of course, it was practically his second language. I didn't smirk. I didn't react. Because this wasn't personal. This was court. Still, there was a strange, quiet symmetry in it. The man who once told me I wasn't ambitious enough to marry now waited on my ruling. I didn't plan this. I never imagined it would come full circle. But here we were. The court reporter typed. Michael shuffled papers. And I sat still, letting 15 years of betrayal settle into the silence. Not to punish, not to gloat, but to let justice finally arrive. Because justice, when it's real, doesn't shout. It doesn't rage. It simply shows up, wearing a black robe, holding a gavel, and asking the man who left you to state his case while knowing you already know how it ends. There's a kind of love that doesn't feel like drowning until you realize you've been holding your breath for years. That's what it was like with Michael. It didn't start with betrayal. It started with charm. That easy, practiced kind of charm that made you feel seen, chosen, special. We met in line at the campus bookstore. He was behind me sighing over the price of his law books like it was a one-man show. You'd think for 15 grand a semester, they'd throw in a free pen. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I was that open. Michael had a way of pulling people into his rhythm. He talked fast, listened slow, and always kept you just off balance close enough to feel wanted, distant enough to keep you reaching. I was working nights saving credits like spare change, trying to claw my way toward a law degree. Michael. He was ambition in a leather jacket, sharp, confident, loud in all the ways I was quiet. He made law school sound like war, and I wanted to believe I was on the front lines with him. I just didn't know I was cannon fodder, not a partner, just collateral. Our first date wasn't really a date. It was strategy. He talked internships like battle plans, professors like adversaries. I don't want to be one of those sad public defenders grinding their lives away, he said. I want law that pays. I nodded, not because I cared about the money, but because he talked like someone who'd already won. And I wanted to be on the winning team. He asked about me at first. I told him about my bakery job, my deferred enrollment plans. He smiled and said, "You've got that scrappy edge. That's rare." I thought it was a compliment. It wasn't. 3 months in, he moved in unofficially. 6 months, and I was paying rent just for now because his aid was delayed. 9 months, and I co-signed a lease. Because his credit was trash, but none of it felt like sacrifice. It felt like momentum, like love in motion. Every small give felt like progress. Every ask sounded temporary. Until one day it wasn't. I came home from a double shift, still buzzing from gas station coffee, and found him laughing on the couch with classmates. I asked gently if he'd looked for part-time work. He looked at me like I'd spit in his drink. "Meg, I can't split focus right now. Law school is already hell. You know that. And I did. Or thought I did. So I dropped it. That night, something in me started to shrink. Quietly, willingly. I stopped asking, stopped talking about bills. I figured out how to stretch groceries thinner, sold my laptop so he could buy a new suit for moot court. Skipped my grandmother's funeral because he had a fever and needed someone to print his outlines. And every time he said, "I couldn't do this without you," or "we're in this together," and I kept believing it. I needed to. I told myself he loved me. But what I really meant was I hoped he would once the hard part was over. Once he had time. Once he made it. What I didn't realize then is if someone only plans to love you later, they never really loved you at all. Slowly, my own dreams got boxed and shelved. I stopped bringing up law school. Every time I did, he'd say, "We'll figure it out after this semester," but after never came. And I stopped asking when, because the alternative facing the truth was worse. I was building a life on a blueprint I never drew. And the cost wasn't just financial, it was spiritual. I forgot what my voice sounded like when it wasn't trying to soothe someone else. I forgot how to want things without permission. The irony. He never once asked me to give it all up. He just let me. And that was enough. That was everything. Because real betrayal doesn't always arrive like a knife. Sometimes it comes like silence, a slow erasure. And one day you look around and realize your name is no longer on your own future. He didn't steal it. I handed it over, one small compromise at a time. Back in the courtroom, he still hadn't recognized me. Or maybe he had, and just couldn't place who I was now. That's the thing about men like Michael. They only remember women in the shape they left them. But I didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't speak. He may have forgotten my name when he walked out, but after a day, he wouldn't forget it again. I planned the day for weeks, Michael's law school graduation, the finish line, the day everything was supposed to turn, for him, for us. I'd been saving for months, tipping extra shifts into an envelope hidden under the cutlery drawer. It wasn't much, but enough for what mattered: a tailored navy blue suit. From Macy's, a second-hand Mont Blanc pen he once said every real lawyer needed, and a dinner reservation at a steakhouse we could never normally afford. This is it, I told myself. Not he made it. We did. That morning, I got up early, made coffee, steamed the shirt, laid everything out on the bed. He barely looked up from his phone. "You nervous?" I asked. He shrugged. "Just focused." I didn't know what that meant. Not yet. He left before I did, said he was meeting classmates for pre-ceremony check-in. I was supposed to meet him at the venue at 11 sharp. I curled my hair, wore makeup for the first time in months, chose earrings that didn't match my budget, but made me feel like maybe this time it was all worth it. At the door, the usher asked for my name, Megan Carter. Guest of Michael Connors. She checked the list, paused, scanned again. Sorry I don't have you. He said he added me. I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. If your name's not here, I can't let you in. I stood there, heels biting into my feet, holding a gift bag with a pen and a card that said, I'm proud of you. We did it. I waited outside the auditorium for nearly an hour, called him, texted, voicemail, again and again. When the ceremony ended, graduates poured out in gowns and grins. And then I saw him, across the street, laughing with Caroline, champagne in hand. She touched his arm. He didn't flinch. They looked like the kind of couple they put on brochures. Polished, photogenic, inevitable. I didn't scream, didn't walk over, didn't throw the gift bag. I turned, walked home, opened the door to the apartment, and knew something was wrong before I even saw the note. His shoes were gone, his laptop, the coffee mug with the Spider-Man decal, gone. On the counter, one sheet of paper, typed, neat. I think we've outgrown each other. I need to focus on building my future. I'll send for the rest of my things. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. No name, no apology, no signature, just deletion. I sat down at the kitchen table, still in my dress. The pen was still in my bag. The dinner reservation, still waiting for a confirmation that would never come. I didn't cry. I remember that clearly. No yelling, no throwing things, just silence. And a cold cup of coffee that I drank anyway. I called once, disconnected, sent one text, delivered, never read. A few days later, a mutual friend messaged, Hey, I thought you knew. Michael's moving in with Caroline. Things kinda happened fast, kinda. That night, I packed 2 bags, left the pen on the counter, took the envelope of leftover cash, walked out without turning the lights off. I didn't know where I was going, only that I was done being the unpaid intern in someone else's success story. People think heartbreak is loud. It isn't. Mine was a power outage. 1 second the lights were on, the next, just dark. But in that dark, something else began to hum. Not revenge, not anger, just clarity. And underneath it, one thought grew sharp and strong, like a root pushing through concrete, never again. Back in the courtroom, I skimmed the file. Emily Connor's declaration was precise infidelity, financial manipulation, psychological coercion, threats to custody. He'd turned into exactly who he always was. But now someone else was holding the wreckage. And me, I wasn't holding the wreckage. I was holding the gavel. I didn't have a plan, just a suitcase, a bus ticket, and a phone. I turned off halfway through the ride out of Chicago. I didn't even tell my sister I was leaving. There was nothing I wanted to say, and no version of myself I wanted to carry with me. The first town I landed in was forgettable. Strip malls, worn asphalt, and diners that opened at 5 a.m. for truckers passing through. I took a room in a weekly rate motel, peeling paint. No questions asked. It was exactly what I needed. Anonymity. I worked at a laundromat during the day. The owner paid under the table and didn't ask about my past. At night, I cleaned houses, sometimes offices, sometimes hotel rooms. I scrubbed other people's leftovers, their dishes, their messes. And each time I wrung out a cloth, I remembered what it felt like to clean up, after a man who once told me I lacked long-term vision. There's a strange clarity that comes from being invisible. I didn't speak unless spoken to. I stopped checking my reflection, stopped checking the time. Days blurred, weeks passed. One day, I walked past a storefront with a flyer taped to the glass. Free GED prep, Community Center Thursdays. I stared at it for a full minute. Not because I didn't have a diploma, I did. But something about the words, start again, felt like a dare. So I went inside. That Thursday, I sat in the back of a room with flickering lights and a whiteboard that still smelled faintly of old expo markers. I didn't speak, just watched. There were women there with kids, men who'd just gotten out of prison, teenagers who'd dropped out. Nobody asked questions, nobody judged. I came back the next week, and the one after that. Not because I needed the classes, but because I needed discipline. I needed to feel myself moving forward inch by inch, even if no one else saw it. At night, I made lists, what I would study, what I would earn, what I would become. I didn't write down lawyer, not yet. I was still too scared of the word. Not because it belonged to Michael, but because I wasn't sure I had the right to claim it for myself. A year passed like that, quiet, predictable, painfully small. And I loved it. I learned to live off $200 a week. To say no to people who asked too much. To go days without speaking and not feel lonely, just intact. I still had his voice in my head sometimes. You're not built for this world, Meg. You'll burn out before you get halfway. But those thoughts began to fade. Not with rage, not with revenge, with distance. One night, after a long shift scrubbing floors at a clinic, I passed by a woman locking up a small legal aid office. There was a sign on the window, volunteers needed, admin and filing. I don't know what made me knock, but I did. She looked me up and down, took in the tired eyes the cleaning uniform, then said, "Can you use a computer?" "Yes. You start Monday. No pay." "That's fine." That office became my second home. I didn't touch anything legal at first, just scanned documents, labeled case files, shredded old folders. But I read, quietly, voraciously, divorce petitions, restraining orders, custody motions. I read them like they were scripture, because I knew those voices. I knew what it was like to be discarded, erased, redefined. And the more I read, the more I felt something shift, not anger, purpose. It was another full year before I said it out loud. A volunteer attorney asked casually, "You ever think of going into law?" And I replied before I could stop myself, "I used to think I wasn't smart enough." He blinked, then said without a trace of irony, "That's exactly the kind of person who should be in the room." That night I applied for community college. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't celebrate. Just closed my laptop, brushed my teeth, and went to bed. Because this time I wasn't chasing approval. Wasn't proving anything to anyone. I wasn't trying to get him back. I was trying to get me back. He walked in late. Not enough to make a scene, just enough to assert something. 4 minutes past the hour. Eyes on the clerk, not on me, not yet. He sat like it was his conference room, spread his materials out neatly, smoothed his tie, exhaled in that way men do when they think the room is theirs to manage. I stayed quiet. The court reporter signaled readiness. Case 21-935 FAM Connors versus Connors. Divorce and custody hearing. Presiding the Honorable Judge M. Carter. He didn't flinch at the name. Of course not. He wouldn't remember my last name. He'd barely remembered my first. "Mr. Connors," I said cool and clear. "You're representing yourself." "Yes, Your Honor," he said with a nod. "I've chosen to proceed pro se. I'm confident in my ability to present the facts." He smiled. "I didn't. You may begin with your opening position." Michael stood, walked to the front like he was delivering a TED Talk. Everything about him was just right pace eye contact posture. A voice trained by courtrooms and reinforced by self-satisfaction. "Your Honor, this divorce is unfortunate but necessary. I've done everything in my power to create a stable environment for my children, financially, emotionally, structurally." He said the word structurally like he was building a bridge, not dismantling a marriage. "My wife, however, has been increasingly erratic. She's made claims, vague ones, with no material evidence." He paused. "She's spoken to a therapist, sure, but therapy is not a court of law. Emotion is not admissible fact." Another pause. Calculated, perfect. And the suggestion that I've exercised undue control is a painful distortion. I've simply been the one carrying the weight of this household. Then he turned slightly toward me, smile-polished voice, humble. "And I only ask that this court view the facts, not the feelings." I looked down at my pad and wrote 4 words, "When facts become feelings." Then I looked up, straight into him. His eyes flicked just slightly. A pause, a shift, a maybe. "Do I know you?" "Why do you feel familiar?" But it passed. Emily's attorney spoke next, calm, methodical, no drama, no theatrics. She listed events, 3 bank accounts Emily had no access to, statements made in front of witnesses, texts, timing, transactions. Michael didn't interrupt. He smiled through it, confident, almost bored, but I saw the subtle things, the clenched jaw, when she mentioned the credit card closed without her consent. The foot tapping when she brought up the burner phone. He thought he was winning. And why wouldn't he? He was a lawyer, in a courtroom, used to being in control, used to being believed. used to women shrinking when he spoke over them. But this wasn't his case. This was my courtroom. Mr. Connors, I said, after the first recess, you'll provide supporting documents for all your financial claims by 3 p.m. today, or they'll be excluded from further argument. Of course, Your Honor, and you'll refrain from unsolicited commentary when opposing counsel is speaking. Naturally. His smile tightened. Just a hair, not enough for a jury to notice. But I saw it. He didn't like being managed, especially not by me. He adjusted his cufflinks, leaned forward, voice soft. If I may speak freely, Your Honor. You may not, I said flatly. This is not a conversation. He blinked, the first crack. This is how control breaks in men like him. Not with shouting, but with silence they can't fill. With rules they can't bend. With women they can't charm. The rest of the day played out like a slow unraveling. He pushed, I held, he tried to frame, I followed the facts. By the third hour he stopped smiling, by the fourth he started sweating. By the end of the day he looked at me like a man trying to remember something he couldn't quite place. And I looked back at him like I would any litigant, with the weight of the law, not memory, but I'll admit this when he stood to leave the courtroom. Tie askew documents clutched like a shield. He hesitated, half-turned, brows pulled in, then left, still not sure why this room didn't feel like his. I didn't tell him, didn't need to. He'd find out soon enough. Michael came back sharper the next morning. New tie, different watch, but the same smile slightly more forced this time. He stood straighter, made a few jokes to the clerk. Classic recovery mode. Like he'd had a pep talk with his reflection overnight. I took my seat as usual, silent, composed. Emily sat still as stone, next to her lawyer. No makeup today, hair tied back, hands clenched in her lap, but her eyes were steady. We'll resume with evidence presentation, I said. Ms. Connors, you may proceed. Her lawyer stood. Your Honor, at this time, the petitioner would like to introduce a supplemental exhibit into evidence audio documentation dated November 8th last year. Objection, Michael snapped too quickly. Your Honor, we've had no prior notification of any audio being entered. Overruled, I said, eyes on the transcript. Proceed. The court clerk pressed play. The room went silent, save for one thing, Michael's voice. Emily, you don't get to decide anything. You don't even understand the bills. You're lucky I don't cut off the accounts entirely. Pause. And if you ever try to take the kids, I will bury you in court. Understand me? You don't win against me. Ever. No yelling, no slurs, just cold. Even, weaponized calm. The kind that doesn't break laws, just people. Michael shifted in his seat. That was taken out of context, he said quickly. We were having a private, the date, time, and authenticity have been verified via metadata, her attorney cut in. Location confirmed as the couple's home office. The device belonged to the nanny who recorded the exchange unintentionally while leaving her phone on the counter. Michael turned just slightly. Wait, she gave that to you. Emily didn't flinch. She didn't need to. The weight of the room shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but definitively. Michael was no longer presenting a case. He was defending himself from one. Mr. Connors, I said, voice sharp but flat. Would you like to revise any portion of your opening testimony before we proceed? He opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence spoke volumes. I let the moment hang, long enough for his own ego to echo. Then the audio is admitted. We'll continue. The rest of the day unraveled quickly. Emails, statements, text threads, each one chipped away at the image he had constructed, the dutiful husband, the overburdened provider, the calm, rational parent. And behind it was something else, a man who had crafted dominance into routine, subtle, lawful, invisible to outsiders, but not to me. Because I had known that version of him long before Emily ever did. I watched him shrink by the hour. Not physically, not obviously, but the smirk didn't come back. The interruptions stopped. The confidence wore thin. Near the end of the day, as the court was adjourned for a 15-minute break, he lingered near the bench. He looked up at me closer than he'd ever been in this version of our lives. Your Honor, he said quietly, almost like a man pulling a thread he didn't know was frayed, I feel like. We've met before, Have we? I looked at him, straight through him, then said if we had Mr. Connors I'd remember. It wasn't a lie. Not the way he expected it. Because I remembered everything. The ramen nights, the notes he never signed, the way he smiled before vanishing. And now he was the one vanishing from the narrative he tried to write for everyone else. As he walked away, I saw it finally, the first flicker of doubt behind his eyes. Not about the case, about me. The third day in court, Michael snapped. He'd been unraveling by inches, now it all gave way at once. No suit could polish that kind of ego damage. It started subtle. Interrupting his ex-wife's attorney, rolling his eyes during testimony, crossing his arms like a child waiting to be scolded. But then he went further. Your Honor, this is character assassination. He barked mid-cross. My wife has clearly been coached. This entire hearing is a performance. I let the words hang for half a second. Then, Mr. Connors, you will address this court with professional decorum or be held in contempt. Oh, come on, he snapped, pushing his chair back slightly. This is personal. I don't know what kind of chip you've got on your shoulder, but silence, dead, waited, the kind that only breaks when someone makes a very bad choice. Finish that sentence, I said calmly. Please. The air dropped 10 degrees. He didn't finish. He looked around like the room betrayed him, as if he couldn't understand why his words weren't working anymore. I've been a lawyer for 13 years, he muttered. I know how this works. I know what bias looks like. I leaned slightly forward, elbows off the bench, voice as still as winter. What you're seeing is not bias, Mr. Connors, it's structure. And structure doesn't care how long you've worn a tie. The gallery was dead quiet. Even Emily glanced up. Even she felt it, that shift in current, when someone who always spoke the loudest finally realized the microphone wasn't his. And that's when he tried his last move. He looked me dead in the eye. I know who you are. Not a question, not a guess, a threat. The courtroom froze except me. I tilted my head, just slightly. Then you should also know how carefully I follow procedure. He waited. I didn't blink. This is a family law hearing, Mr. Connors, I said slowly. Not a stage for personal projection, not a theater for wounded egos, and certainly not a mirror. That broke him more than any gavel ever could. Because what men like Michael fear most isn't punishment, it's irrelevance. He looked down, not because he gave up, but because he couldn't stand the truth. I wasn't afraid of him. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was beyond him. The next hour of testimony passed in silence. No objections, no posturing, just facts. Cold, clean, undeniable. Documents showing financial isolation. Email threads laced with legal intimidation. Childcare receipts paid out of Emily's secret account, just enough to survive, not enough to be free. I signed the temporary custody order without comment, not because I wanted to punish him, but because the facts required it. Emily didn't look triumphant. She looked steady, like a woman learning how to stand upright again. As the courtroom emptied, Michael lingered. He stood by the exit, staring, a man watching a ship he once owned sail without him. He said nothing, because he knew who I was now, knew what I'd become, knew in some deep part of his entitled spine that the girl he'd erased had not only returned, she had rewritten the entire story. And he couldn't speak her name, because he'd spent years pretending it didn't exist. And now it belonged on the court seal above his head. The Honorable Judge Megan D. Carter. The final ruling was straightforward. Emily received primary custody, a detailed co-parenting plan, access to all shared assets frozen until independent review. Michael didn't argue, not because he agreed, but because he understood. The performance was over, and no one was clapping. I signed the court order with a pen I rarely used, a Mont Blanc, second-hand, the same one I bought 15 years ago, the day I thought love meant sacrifice. He never accepted the gift, never even unwrapped it, but I kept it. Funny how the things we buy in hope end up serving us in truth. Emily lingered outside the courtroom, not hesitant, just unsure. We exchanged a glance, no words, but something passed between us. Not solidarity, not sympathy, recognition. She wasn't me. But we'd both stood in a room and realized the man across from us never saw us as real, just convenient, replaceable, small. Later that day, I was back in chambers removing my robe filing paperwork. The court clerk stepped in. "He's gone," she said. Who I asked, even though I already knew. Michael Connors. Just walked out. Didn't say a word. Didn't even ask for a copy of the order. I nodded. Of course he didn't. And there was nothing in those papers he wanted to remember. In my office drawer was a letter. Folded, yellowing slightly. Typed, no signature. "I think we've outgrown each other. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." I never threw it away. Not as a keepsake, but as a receipt. A receipt for what he cost me. And a reminder that some debts can't be paid, only answered. I didn't gloat, didn't cry. I went home, made tea, fed the cat, opened my laptop, and reviewed the next day's calendar. Because healing isn't a headline, it's a habit. That night, I wrote Emily a letter. Simple, no sympathy, no advice. If you need a reference for employment, list me. No explanation required. I didn't sign it as Megan. I signed it as Judge Carter. Because that's who she met, and because some versions of me no longer need to reappear. Sometimes I think about the version of him that sat across from me, confused, small or tired, in a way he couldn't name. That's the thing about power. He once had it because I gave it. Now I keep mine because I built it. He used to write my story, line by line, decision by decision. And now I sign the ending, with the same pen, on the other side of the bench.